Great. Thank you for being here. We've reached the beginning of the book of Leviticus. And this Shabbat, the Shabbat before Purim, as some of you know, is called Shabbat Zachor. Because in addition to the regular Torah reading at the beginning of Leviticus, there's a special Torah reading from the book of Deuteronomy, just a very short one, that says, remember what Amalek did to you. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. So Shabbat Zachor it's a very important passage. And the reason it comes right before Purim, and I know that this will be, for some of you, this is very familiar material, and we hopefully will be able to shed light on it, is that in the story of Esther, which we'll be reading next Wednesday night, Haman is associated as a descendant of Amalek. And Amalek, in the Jewish tradition, starting in the Torah, becomes the representative, the symbol of unhinged evil in Judaism. So if you are a conversant in Jewish talk, if you say Amalek, that Hitler was a descendant of Amalek, that's because Hitler represents that unhinged evil. So I want to look today, given that our world is beset by unhinged evil right now, it's an important, I think that's what, as always, I follow what draws me, and that certainly drew me today as I looked at the assigned Torah readings for this, this Shabbat. So let's say the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Creator our God. Your presence fills the universe, and you have given us the mitzvah of engaging in words of Torah. Okay. Hold on a second. So first, let me just show you the passage itself. We'll start with the text, but then I want to zoom way out for a little bit. And especially today, again, your input is really welcome, whether you decide to raise your hand or type in the chat, and so it can be as much of a conversation as possible over Zoom. And I have some basic information so that we're all talking on the same page here, which I will certainly get across to you. So let me share my screen and show you the passage. Okay, hold on. This is the passage we read in synagogue this Shabbat. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. How, undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when your God Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh grants you safety from all your enemies around you in the land that your God Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. Now, frequently we focus on that strange paradox of remember not to forget. Do not forget, remember to blot out. But before we go there, I want to go to something much even prior to that, which is the consideration of evil. There are books and books written about the fancy word theodicy. theodicy, which means God and evil. And the question that people pose is, if God is all good, how can there be evil in the world? Yes, Ellen typed it into the chat for us. If God is all good, how can there be evil in the world? If God is an all-knowing, omniscient, supernatural, all-powerful, etc., why is there evil in the world? Now, frankly, this is not my issue, right? It's not really how I frame the question. Even from a mystical perspective, from the experience of mystical experience, which some of us here may have shared, where you have some kind of amazing experience in your life, where you experience the benign and loving nature that suffuses all creation, right? That goodness that is, and you come, and after that experience, there's some part of you that knows that's the truth. And you still say, why is there evil? For me, it's not a complicated question. There's evil in biblical terms because the Creator gave human beings choice. Choice to follow the path of morality and love, and choice to follow the path of selfishness and greed, right? So for me, the question of why is there evil is in fact a human question. It's a question because, let me say it this way, evil is a moral category, right? If we use the word evil, and I think we should in certain cases, evil is a moral category, and morality is the realm of human behavior, where we have the choice. And however you frame it, however you want to, whatever mythic origin you want to associate with why humans are this way, we are this way, right? We are a mixture, in the Jewish tradition, we say, of different natures. As we've talked about, our Yetzer Hara, which is translated as our inclination towards evil, is considered to be our base drives and appetites, which is all about me. And we've also been somehow instilled with, it's part of our makeup, a Yetzer HaTov, an inclination towards the greater good, which is part of who we are. And we are this internal battleground, honestly, of how do we channel, transform, transmute, utilize our drives for wanting for ourselves into a service of a greater good. Right? This is the challenge of being a moral human being. Therefore, for me, the definition of evil is when a person is not wrestling with their base drives. When they have abandoned, ignored, or in some way trivialized or even rationalized away their higher calling as human beings. So evil for me is human behavior unhinged from moral concerns. And there we are. So I think it's a good definition. There's many ways one could phrase that, but absent compassion, absent the ability, absent empathy, absent the capacity to consider what your actions, how they might be impacting another person, and have compassion for that other possibility, in the absence of that, evil is abroad in the world. Now, in the Jewish tradition, and again, I welcome your thoughts and comments anytime.
Hey, Jonathan.
Yes.
It's Rob. So with that definition, and I, just so you know, I agree with you,
Mm-hmm.
that's a large swath of the population. If I really think about what you said and take it to heart and look at what people do for a living, or even what they do in their hobbies, I think a large swath of the population sadly falls into that
Well, but
category.
not as a, Rob, not as a definition of who they are, but of some of
Correct.
their behaviors.
Correct. That
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I just as okay. Are you talking, just to be clear, that definition is more of the who they are, the deeper
Well, no,
fiber.
it's Judaism would never posit that someone was completely evil, because our soul comes from God. So, in the words of Nachman of Bratslav, every single person has a nikuda tova, which means an inner point that is good and is connected to the great soul of the universe. So, in Jewish thought, even the most irredeemable person is considered to not be evil in their essence. They may be irredeemable in this lifetime. They may have, and so let me take a little, Marsha, I'll get to your interesting comment shortly. Yes, the morning prayer says, Elohai neshamash natatabi tahorahi. My God, the soul you've implanted within me is pure. And that is the fundamental Jewish understanding, because how could we be made in the image of God and not carry somewhere in beneath our occluded, misbegotten, selfish, completely or mentally ill or whatever, we have a point that connects us to that goodness that pervades creation. So, so there's a beautiful midrash. Sarah, I'll call on you shortly too. Thank you for raising your hand. There's a beautiful midrash that, you know, that when you read the story of the crossing of the Red Sea and the drowning of the Egyptian army, there's no mention of Pharaoh. There's no mention that Pharaoh drowns in the sea. And so, midrash lovers, this becomes an opportunity to say, well, what happened to Pharaoh? And the most famous midrash about Pharaoh after that is that in the classic folktale motif of the king who has been dethroned and becomes a wanderer, Pharaoh wanders. And where does he wander to? And again, this is legend. This is, you know, fantastical stuff. He wanders to Nineveh. Nineveh is the capital city of Babylonia. It's the city that God tells Jonah to go to tell them that they've become evil and they need to change their ways or they're going to be destroyed. And in the Midrash, Pharaoh shows up in Nineveh, and again in this motif of the king who doesn't appear, Pharaoh is so naturally kingly that his royalty is recognized and he is placed on the throne of Nineveh. The king of, why can they tell the story? Because the king of Nineveh is not named. And so the Midrash says, when Jonah comes to Nineveh to denounce their evil ways, Pharaoh is the king of Nineveh, and Pharaoh immediately repents and says, and tells all his people to repent and to stop their evil ways, because Pharaoh had learned. Now, there's nothing in the Torah about this, right? Pharaoh's Pharaoh. God hangs him up by his own petard. God hardens his heart. But in the Midrash, the rabbis want you to know that even Pharaoh gets a second chance. It's one of my absolute favorite Midrashim. Isn't that beautiful?
Great.
So that's to answer your question, Rob. Now, I'm going to look at Marsha's comment and then recognize Sarah. Marsha said, and when there's absence of acknowledging our baser drives, it is also problematic. That is for sure, as any of us who have studied ourselves know, or history. I would posit, and again, please don't think I'm tarring an entire civilization, but one of the greatest difficulties in Christianity is that the spirit was separated from the body, and the base drives of being alive were considered to be evil. They're not evil. They're only evil if they're not tempered by our higher consciousness. So, and so you then project, as we all know, all of your base qualities that you can't possibly have because you're pure onto other people and onto other groups, and evil, you then become a vehicle for the dehumanization of others, which is another of the ways of describing what evil is: a lack of empathy, a lack of humanizing the other. So that inner split, in a misguided effort to distance ourselves from our evil impulse, yes, creates as many problems as anyone who distances themselves from their higher purpose. They have to work in concert, and it is a challenge and a struggle that makes us human. Thank you for that, Marcia. Sarah?
I have something from earlier, but just from what you said just now, I had a neighbor who was, a practicing Christian. I don't know what denomination, but he, talked about his appetite, his sexual appetites, and how that he was evil. He thought he was a bad human being for having sexual thoughts. And I thought that was the saddest thing ever.
It is sad.
But just going back to that every soul has merit, because ultimately, and from my perspective, each soul is a spark of God. From the New Age metaphysical perspective, Hitler basically played a role. He volunteered to play the role of this evil, element. For what end, I don't know. But anyway, that in a certain way, like if we all think of having chosen our parents or whatever, that it's a similar aspect to that,
right.
Chose
Thank
the role.
you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make a strong negation of that perspective.
Sure.
Sarah. Because first of all, it presumes that we puny humans can actually get a picture of some kind of metaphysical purpose to human existence that I think is actually us grasping at straws. And it's also, for me, terribly offensive, because it implies that we Jews somehow chose to be under Hitler. And so all of it just falls apart for me, and I refuse to go there. And it's one of my problematic things about many New Age perspectives. Like, they're grandiose and then veer rapidly into bullshit. So I have spoken.
I will take it under thought. And
yes, please do.
There's so much more to what I just said,
Yes, and I wasn't equating you.
No,
I wasn't equating you with that perspective, but I reject it completely.
I don't take it personally. I see Deborah saying she gets so angry at that perspective, and I certainly don't want to, raise anyone's ire. There's way more than what I've just talked about, but I hear you, and I will definitely ruminate over it.
Yes, and you should know that I have spent much time, and I'm not the least bit angry at you. No, not at all. I have spent a lot of time in those realms of discourse earlier in my life. For me, they didn't work, because they make us into judge and jury over things we don't really have control over or understand. And we wish we did. We wish we understood why this was such a mess. It's much more satisfying for me to look at it as an eternal struggle of our species. And that doesn't at all negate the spiritual reality that I affirm. I affirm that spiritual reality, but not meta explanations for human history. I find those to be reductive.
I thoroughly hear you. I just want to share one more thing, which is a personal experience. When I was in high school, I was walking home from school one day. It was spring. I came across a blooming magnolia tree, and I just kind of sat on the rock wall near it and had this very deep spiritual experience, whatever energy was happening there at that moment, which carried forward for weeks of having this deep understanding of that I love everybody, whether they're, you know, a bum on the street or whatever the version of the human shell was. I recognize that in the interior of the shell is a soul, a love, you know, love, and that we all deserve love no matter what our exterior shell is. And for some reason, I feel like that's tied into what I'm trying to express, but.
Yes, and I hope that, I don't know, I did say this at the beginning, that a significant number of us are graced with similar mystical breaks, they're called, where you see through the world, and for a period, often it's described as weeks, one walks around in the conviction and with the deep knowing that what you say is true. I've had that experience too. So I completely validate it for you. And that brings up the question of evil. And so we want to, if it's like this, I'll call on you in a second, Susan. If it's like this, why is there evil? For me, a cosmic explanation doesn't work because precisely what I was saying. How could little old me, who can only get intimations of this universe of ours, possibly begin to explain 7 billion other people's experience? It's like, for me, it's the height of hubris to then translate my experience into a cosmic explanation of everything. And that's why I don't go there. So instead, I look at human behavior itself, which Judaism, fortunately, kind of gives us a graphic description of, which is that every human being is wrestling with a complex nature. And despite our awareness of what could be, it's not easy for us as incarnated beings to manifest it because we're complicated. And some of us lose our way and think and maybe never even contact the spiritual aspect and find ourselves only concerned with our own survival. And so how do we awaken our higher selves? This becomes the question. Once we have awakened our higher selves, how do we then mercilessly look at our behaviors and acknowledge all of our failings? It's like, these are the questions that are juicy for me. Even though I'd love to have the cosmic explanation of everything, I don't think that we can express it in useful ways in language. Anyway, thank you. I hope this is fruitful for you too. Let me call on Susan.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
One of the views that I find helpful for myself is reincarnation, because I feel everybody has, of course, we all have good and evil within us, or let's say most of us aren't just like this perfect evolved human being that's always loving and always kind and generous and all of that. And I think when we acknowledge some of our flaws, that's good, that's positive. But when I look at certain beings like Putin, for instance, is a good example. The only way that I can feel that there's some kind of justice, is to think that in his next life, he's going to be born in a really bad situation, where he's getting, he's on one of these boats of people escaping from, someplace in Africa, and they land in the water. You know what I mean? These horrible. So for me, to believing in reincarnation and believing that people, if they don't get their just desserts in this lifetime, they're going to get it further along, makes me really believe in reincarnation. So I just
thank you. Might be true, but I'm going to take, since I'm being direct today, if it gives you comfort, good. That doesn't make it true. We can't know if it's true.
No, of course not.
No, I mean, and so one of the issues of reincarnation, okay, friends, we're being very, very metaphysical today, is that it presumes that time is linear outside of our physical experience. Marcia wrote, "We so yearn for justice and fairness in the world." Thank you, Marcia. That's exactly what needs to be said. Yes, we so yearn for justice and fairness in the world. And Ellen wrote, "May we wrestle with mercy for our wonderfully imperfect selves." Thank you all for those comments. Leah, just a minute, I'll call on you soon. But before this hour's over, I do want to get back to, it's so interesting to discuss this. We so much want to understand. Briefly, Susan, reincarnation, time only exists for me here in the physical realm. Outside of it, there is no progression of lives. It's all happening at the same time. And so our desire for there to be justice be served by explaining a linear kind of progression of payback, I wish. I don't know if it's true. I think there's a cosmic struggle going on inside each of us and throughout our species. Vicky, what if we absolutely know there is reincarnation? Yes, but we then reduce it to a linear time, right? Your previous self didn't die in year X and then you were born in year Y. That's only from our perspective. I'm not saying that we don't have multiple aspects of our souls and that they're not all experiencing not only this historical dimension, but many dimensions all at once. I'm saying that when we try to reduce it to a logical explanation of why I'm suffering now, oh, it's because of this past life, if that's useful, use it, but don't accept it as like the truth, because we don't know. Use it, definitely. So that's how I feel about that. Just like with Sarah, I know these experiences are real, but then we want to reduce them to kind of our physical reality and cause and effect. And I just don't think it necessarily holds up quite well. Okay, I didn't expect to be going in this direction. Deborah.
So for me, this is so useful when I look at it in terms of how are we to show up for Hitler and Putin and Donald Trump, the things that seem so clear to us to be the unbridled evil. So I just want to tell a little story. I was in a play recently put on by the New Russia Cultural Center. And who knew with now what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, the play was about Jewish people in the Ukraine who were brutalized by the Soviet government after World War II. So Soviet government was involved in saving Jews and then turned against Jews. And the play is very, very powerful. It's put on by this group. Well, there was this talk about us doing this play as a fundraiser for the Jewish Federation in Albany. So here's what happened. And for me, this is such a profound standing up to, so we're all going about doing this until somebody mentions that the New Russia Cultural Center is refusing to condemn what Putin is doing. So there you go, that, we're not political, but then, saying, well, maybe it's the US troops that are there in Russia, not really Russian troops, and just crazy denial of the evil. So it makes me think, what do we do when we see that evil not recognized and we see that evil supported? And so some of these incredible humans who are part of this Russian Cultural Center have been sending out emails saying we are not participating in anything that's done by this organization if this organization is not going to condemn evil when we see it. And all of us have united to stand up and make it public that this organization is, by their silence, giving their consent to what's obviously wrong and bad. So it's crystallized for me that as a human, I get to do that. And as humans, when we see evil, we get to call it by its name. We get to stand up against it and join with other people who care about doing something better. So I just wanted to share that.
Wow. That just happening for you. Wow.
It's happening right now. I mean, some of them have been writing to the US government. Some have been writing to the Times Union. People are really making it public that we have the opportunity here to say, no, this isn't okay.
Thank you. Sylvia, I'll call on you in a moment, okay? I just want to backtrack a little, and I don't want anyone to, I really hope I really spoke strongly, and I don't want people to feel invalidated by any perspectives I've shared. What I usually say, and what I mean, is that whatever spiritual framework each of us has developed that helps us to become the people we want to be, use it. What I bridle against is putting a final kind of stamp of reality on it. This is the way things are. I don't even want to do that for myself, even though it's my tendency. That everything's a draft until pending us understanding more is sort of how I like to put it. But I really hope that for each, and what is a useful perspective? I'm a functionalist in terms of theology or cosmology. If your perspective is allowing you to grow in love, awareness, and having your feet on the ground, it's a good perspective. But if you find that it's causing you to have to shield your eyes or judge other people or not deal with the world the way it is, then maybe you need to rejigger some of the beliefs you're working with. And so let's just all acknowledge, and myself included, that these are all descriptions that we're working with to try to help us grapple with reality. And enough said. Leah, you had your hand up before.
Yes, last night with great difficulty, I watched the movie The Pianist.
Oh.
Because tonight it's going to be discussed through the Saratoga Council of the Arts group. And so And it was really hard to watch, especially the beginning of the movie. The end, I knew he was going to live, but and the brutality of this big fat Nazi man. And I'm thinking, as a kid, he's getting all of his grievances out on the Jews. I mean, the brutality. Then there were a few people who were decent and went above and paid for it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be a whole discussion, 6 panelists, and it's so hard. It could have been us. It just could have been us. And the thing of it is, it still could be us.
Yep.
I still think of myself. I think of myself leaving my house, and it could. That is the scary part about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, Susan. Susan said, I only said that I hope there's reincarnation, as it makes me feel that evildoers will get what they deserve. Kenya Hiratsan, so may it come. Thank you, Leah. Okay, so what I want to say is, and I guess I'm picking this up, it's like this is a timely Torah reading for us, because evil, unbridled evil, is abroad in the world right at this moment. Not the kind, well, they have mixed motives. Putin is destroying another country. He's doing it without mercy and without cause. And because he has consolidated so much power and military might, we're looking at untold destruction and the possibility of a global conflict. We're looking at that right now. And it is not my way to jump ahead into high anxiety, because I can't live that way. So maybe all continue to drink in the joys of the present, because the present is still benign. The reality of the universe is still magnificent. It's also, that is also, and that is for me, my haven and my sanctuary and my deepest foundation. But if we don't, if we don't recognize evil when it rears its head, and I define evil as human behavior unhinged from empathy or compassion. Unhinged, right? That is what Jewish tradition calls our Yetzer Hara, our inclination towards evil. When our inclination towards evil, which dwells in each of us, is unhinged from our inclination for the greater consciousness, which is called our Yetzer HaTov, then we see what we see. It happens regularly in both, whether it's domestic violence or global conflict, right? Evil rears its head. So before our time is up, Sarah says, if a soul were a circle that had white, black, and gray parts, could be that the soul of Putin is 99% dark and 1% white. Going back to what I said, that in the Jewish tradition, we can't be irredeemable because we come from that source of light. However, we can be virtually irredeemable because of the path, our choices, our brain chemistry, our lack of nurturing, or the abuse we've absorbed. So many reasons lead human beings into unhinged, selfish behavior. Yes, there's the famous story about whatever part we feed gets stronger. And again, in the Jewish tradition, I will repeat that the suppression of, or the denial of the evil inclination, it leads to self-delusion and danger. the brilliance of Jewish sacred psychology is that it is every parent's job, every community's job, every moral society's job to set up the circumstances where each individual will learn how to channel their drive into constructive, creative, empathetic actions. And that is the human struggle. So briefly, let me share now about Amalek a little bit more. I want to be really concise. As you might imagine, and endangering the entire planet, exactly, with our unhinged, self-centered behavior. Exactly. As you might imagine, there is a stream of thought in Judaism where Amalek wants to destroy the Jews. And so when it says, blot out Amalek, it means that we have to destroy them first. I would be dishonest if I didn't say there was that stream in Judaism. And so Amalek can be assigned, therefore, to any enemy. And God is on our side, and Amalek is them. And so, ironically, by taking that simplistic view of this, you become Amalek, right? By completely externalizing evil, and then being determined to defeat it, once again, you become Amalek, that which you were supposed to wipe out. There are elements of the Jewish world that invoke Amalek just for that purpose, right? I don't want to go there. I want to be more, I want to go for the more nuanced vision of this, which is very much in the heart of Jewish thinking about this. And it's done as usual with wordplay. So for example, here, let me share the screen. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. Asher korcha baderech. Now, korcha means surprised you on the march. But korcha, oh, okay, I'm going to get Blaze's comment here. Blaze says, I was just going to ask, can one have compassion and empathy for the evil person? That person must be terribly wounded or traumatized in some way, or not. Just evil and that's it. That's a great question, Blaze. I'll give you my answer, which is I can't think that globally. I don't know Putin. I don't know. It's like, I don't know. However, I've taken care of a lot of children in my life. And I have power in that situation. So that when one kid is being horribly cruel, I can stop them and still have empathy for them, right? I can do that with kids. So it's not complicated to me. I've even learned as a rabbi over the many years that I can do that with adults. I can interrupt their hurtful behavior and still have empathy for them. So I know it's possible. For any of us elevated beings who can extend it all the way to Putin, bless your heart. I'm not there, but I know it's possible. Does that answer your question, Blaze, or address your question? And you can unmute yourself if you want.
Yeah. It's a question that just stays with me all the time, really.
Yes, it should stay with us all the time. We should carry that question all the time.
You know, I can't do anything to stop Putin, but I can pray that wisdom will come that he might see the light, that he might be somehow healed enough to change. That's all I can do.
Yeah. That's a beautiful prayer. Thank you. That's a beautiful prayer. I'm just reading your comments. Thank you. Yes, Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, we can love the evildoer. Yes, we can. We're not failures if we don't, as long as we don't become evil ourselves. And I would say that is a Jewish perspective, which is that our actions matter more than whether we're internally able to do whatever. It's beautiful to get to that place, but let us not become evil ourselves. And Marcia says, if we can't feel compassion for another, we can try to have more compassion for our own flaws. All of it true. Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. Yes, the book about Trump's childhood by his niece. Yes. Yep. I wish I understood. We so desperately want to explain why people go astray, why we lose our minds from time to time. And all we can do is practice keeping our feet grounded in the reality of love and compassion. Because we're in a maelstrom in this lifetime. It just is that way. Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, when he says in one of his famous teachings from the mid-1800s, is that if you identify someone else as Amalek, you'd better look inside yourself to see if you also have any of those qualities incipient in yourself. Right? So this is always gonna, if we're not self-reflective and self-aware, we've lost. But if we're only self-reflective and self-aware and don't stand up against evil behavior, we're useless. And so again, we have this incredibly moving target challenge of keeping our body and soul together while we try to do what's right. It's heartening to me that because Putin's evil is so blatant and so adulterated, that even corporations, even if it's only at us so they don't want to be ostracized by other corporations, the world, much of the world is responding with resistance. And there's a time for that. I think this is the time. For Jews, if we, despite our highest desires and dreams for how the world could be, if we don't remember that in living memory, this happened to us, and the world did not stand up, then we're fools. I mean, we may be holy fools, but we're fools. So this, it's that time. It's that time both to stand up to Amalek and to make sure we don't become Amalek. And they're not contradictory. They have to go together, or we're failures in our attempt to be our best selves. Sylvia.
Okay, kind of nervous to say this because it's a vulnerable place, but
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'll be gentle.
Okay, thank you. No, I struggle with the two sides of myself in that I think what's happening that Putin's doing is horrible, killing children, bombing hospitals. And then there's the part of me that will have some feelings about the Ukrainian people.
Oh, yeah.
I want to protect them, but I know that when you say who stood up for us, that the Ukrainians were not really good people. Now, not all the Ukrainians. I want to say that. It's not everybody. But I think, oh my God. So I have both these sides of myself,
I do too.
Yeah. And I guess it's okay as long as we're aware of it, right? That I'm angry with these people And I realized that these people who this is happening to are really the children and grandchildren of the people who didn't stand up. The other people probably aren't even alive at this point, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway,
the Ukrainians were amongst the most enthusiastic allies of the Nazis in murdering all their Jews. 1.5 million Ukrainian Jews estimated murdered.
Yeah.
So we could righteously take the perspective of screw them, right? We could do that. We all, I'm painfully aware of it and of the impossible ironies of history here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you. And you know, Khmelnytsky, who was the Ukrainian big cheese in the 1600s, committed the greatest to date atrocity against the Jews in the 1650s, killing something like 50,000 to 100,000 Jews in Ukraine. And that was in pre-modern population levels. So it's such, oh man, let's just not give up on the human race. That's all I want to say.
Jonathan, can I ask a question about the translation of the text?
Yeah, just a second, Roberta, because Barbara raised her hand, and then I'm going to call on you.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, I'm a little hesitant to say this. Most people don't want to be told that what they're doing is wrong or somebody's viewing it as evil. Part of my own definition of evil is creating suffering for one's own pleasure.
Oh.
And to me, eating meat is exactly that. People do not have to eat meat in order to survive. So one's doing it usually for one's own pleasure. But the amount of suffering that's created is enormous. And generally, I mean, earlier in my life, I talked about that, and for a long time I haven't. I just felt drawn to say that. And it's not as though I'm attacking anybody.
You are not.
But to me, it's a really great source of suffering in the world, and it's unnecessary.
Thank you.
I'm calling Amalek for what it is, in my view.
That's right, and well said. We are all complicit. And I really appreciate you saying that. And in fact, this is an interesting discussion for me. I'm so glad I can wade into these things with you. First of all, thank you for letting me speak forcefully and for not shying away too far. And but secondly, we liberals don't like discussing evil because it is such a judgmental word. And yet it feels important right now. So I'm very grateful for this. Roberta?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that comment. I don't know who just made it, about the suffering that we bring on in the way we live. Yeah, I was just wondering.
That was Barbara.
Barbara, thank you, Barbara. The screen always jumps around. So
I know.
That was. So where the text, Deuteronomy says, remember to blot out the memory of Amalek, could that also read, remember to blot out Amalek's memory? And the reason why I'm like looking at it that way is, so for example, Putin, to use an easy example,
the Amalek du jour.
Like, yeah. So, he was, we all know, right, lost his, maybe both parents at a young age, was completely groomed to be a CIA, Freudian slip, completely groomed to be, KGB. I mean, he was a KGB assassin. So the training includes absolutely the most sophisticated anything humans have developed to sever empathy, right? That's the training to be the systematic killer. And so that memory of being that way is what's in power, right? It's the memory of exerting power and making choices completely severed from empathy. So I'm just wondering, is that what Torah is telling us, that if we want to root out evil, whether it's from birth or not, how will we ever know? That what we have to do is, heal. It still calls us to heal whatever is implanted in the human heart, right? That has blocked the connection to empathy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. See, and the Torah, as usual, is very terse. So it's our job, legitimate job, to do what you're doing, which is to pull out these possible interpretations. Because the Torah itself, it's like we're dealing with 3 verses. 3 verses that, for me, instigate this conversation. That's what I value about it, but not just amongst us, but across 3,000 years of Torah interpretation. And so that's what we're doing with Torah study. So thank you. Your words are Torah, Roberta. We're running over a couple minutes, but I'm going to ask Blaze, who raised her hand, to say what you'd like to say.
Thank you. Barbara, when Barbara spoke, it was reminding me of an article I read recently in the New Yorker about the successful transplant through many, many iterations of science of a pig's heart into a human. Mm-hmm. And they are raising pigs now with whatever mutations they need to do with them to make their hearts even better for transplantation into humans. And I come across this kind of, the value that we put on human lives is greater than the value that we put on animal lives.
Yes.
And yet, animals and plants are consistently sacrificing their lives on our behalf. Mm-hmm. And it's just, a struggle that I think about and deal with. I don't have an answer. Mm-hmm. But the truth of the matter is that that we don't really value, or a lot of people don't really value human life, because we go around killing each other all the time. Mm-hmm. And if we did, maybe there wouldn't be so much violence and war. I don't know. I'm just kind of, I don't have that worked out very well, but.
You have it worked out very well. As Deborah just wrote, what a great example of wrestling with moral issues. This is what we are called to do. Right? Once, unfortunately, straight up evil rears its head sometimes, like it is right now out of Putin's Russia. And we know what we need to do. I think it's one of the reasons why people find war so galvanizing. Because most of the time, when we're not faced with this immediate call to action, we have to wrestle. And that's what most of daily life is like, and most of our decisions are like, because there's morality to weigh on all things. At what price the extension of human life? This is a moral issue. It's bioethics. It's like, and it's what we need to be engaged with. So I thank you for that. And I guess why I wanted to raise the more extreme Amalek sort of externalized Jewish archetype is because I feel like it's raised itself up right now. And we need to not shy away from that current reality. And what action is called from us now when moral issues are clearer, where utter destruction is being wreaked. And so that's why I was drawn to this passage today, which we'll be reading in synagogue this Saturday. No, I appreciate the moral wrestling we're all doing. Oh my. I have a lot more to say, but I won't say it today. And I really appreciate the time we've had together today. As Cynthia said, great conversation, very thought-provoking. Thanks to all. Thanks to Rabbi Jonathan, and keep on struggling. Thank you, Cynthia. I think anybody has to go back to work, and we're going to conclude this recording now and make sure we take time for our healing prayers.